Something very curious about the Second World War that very few people know is the curious case of the spherical turrets of the B-17 Flying Fortress. When they were thrown to the ground, in full flight, this was a procedure that saved many lives and was extremely necessary in some extreme cases. And although you may not believe it, it is not something that was done provisionally. It is something perfectly devised by the engineers who designed the aircraft to literally save the ship in the air. In this video, we will talk about that interesting procedure and why not. We will talk about the operation of these intriguing machines that were crucial for the bombers in the Second World War. So get comfortable, I'm Kevin Aguilar, and this is Guns Club. The ball turrets themselves were artifacts. Extremely curious, they were very small spheres that allowed a gunner to operate two M2 Browning 50 caliber anti-aircraft. Being an operator of these was considered the most dangerous job of the bomber, and in fact of the entire Second World War, since the bombers operated at medium heights, and high made it more common for these turrets to be attacked from all angles. So their operators were either very brave or very unfortunate, as they were normally entrusted with the task of operating them under orders and not voluntarily. Its cultural impact is gigantic, inspiring many cult works like Star Wars. The most common and smallest was the Sperry turret. Its small size of 1.1 meters in diameter allowed it to have very low air resistance. It was operated by a very short man, and to get into them, the turret had to be pointed completely down, so that the doors of the bomber and the turret would align. Then the gunner could enter and put on the safety straps, finally closing the door that separated the turret from the cockpit. The ball turret was designed to protect the bomber from almost all angles. However, it was designed to protect the bomber, not the gunner. Inside, there was no room for a parachute. The parachute was outside of the turret. So, in an emergency, the gunner had to align the turret downwards to be able to get out and grab the parachute that was right above. If the bomber was falling, this was almost impossible. So many gunners simply strapped a parachute to their chest just in case. It was uncomfortable, but it was better than having nothing to stop your fall in a bad situation. Inside, you were left in a fetal position that left both machine guns in view between your legs and above your groin. The handles to cock the machine gun were operated with pulleys. If a machine gun jammed and the ammunition didn't come out with the pulleys, it was a big problem. The small size of the cabin made it problematic to unjam the machine gun, but the mechanism box of the M2S used in these turrets had a cover that was very easy to remove, although it was still quite difficult to unjam a machine gun in mid-flight. These did not reload themselves, so you had to take the belts that were on top of the turret and reload the machine guns periodically. The turret was moved by a joystick in your hands that had buttons to fire the machine guns. Also, if you couldn't, the pilots could help you move the turret from the cabin. The right foot operated the turret intercom and the left the distance of the reflex sight. The turret's electric motors moved it as fast as the planes they were aiming at. Being inside one of these was not only dangerous, it was really annoying. The movement was really limited. Your provisional parachute and ammunition barely left you room to be inside. Cramps were common. You spent much of the mission alone because surveillance had to be constant, up to 10 uninterrupted hours, and the oxygen mask was indispensable to keep you alive, as this part was not pressurized. You probably wonder how they managed to land with this huge capsule under the plane. In the case of the B-24 Liberators, these could raise their ball turret inside during takeoffs and landings. This technology gave much more security in general, but in the B-17 Flying Fortresses, this was not possible. The landing gear of the same had the necessary height to be able to land with the turret. However, despite this, it was forbidden for the gunner to be inside the turret during the landing and landing takeoffs, because if the landing gear failed, the gunner would be crushed inside the sphere. In fact, Rooney, in his 1995 book, My War, narrates how a B-17 returned from a mission, and due to the damage received during this, the plane's hydraulic system prevented the landing gear from deploying. Also, the turret could not be articulated to get the gunner out. They didn't have much fuel, so in the end, unable to get the gunner out, and to save the rest of the crew, they decided to belly land anyway. This caused the gunner to be crushed between the plane and the ground. The most interesting thing about the turret was seen when the plane was going to make a forced landing. When the crew noticed that the plane was too damaged to return home, they prepared for a forced landing. The landing gear always stuck out a bit from the fuselage. When it was collected, this provided additional cushioning that in forced landings partially protected the plane from structural damage. However, as you might guess when they made a landing of this type, they left the landing gear in. Then what happened to the ball turret? It was crushed by the plane, killing the gunner. Well, not really. A forced landing with the turret would cause the plane to fall unevenly, causing the most damage to the plane's structure. So when a situation where the crew knew they were not going to make it home, either due to structural damage or lack of fuel, they had to drop the ball turret to make the emergency landing. As indicated by this instructional document of the time, what they did was to tell the gunner to get out of the ball turret. For this, he had to point the turret completely downwards. Then the gunner and a partner required two essential tools to perform their task, a wrench and a hammer. In this way, they released a series of bolts that held the turret and the ring of the same to the harness that connects the turret to the plane. This process lasted 20 minutes, but if they had a little more time, they could rescue the site of the K-4 turret, which was undoubtedly the most expensive part. The turret cost $3,700 at the time. That's about $40,000 current dollars. However, usually the crews used to ignore this step, and there were very few cases where the gunners considered rescuing the site because removing it could take 20 minutes. More so, the whole task of removing the turret could take between 20 and 40 minutes, depending on how much time the crew members have and how aware they were of the price of the equipment the turret had. In situations of low fuel where the pilots ordered to throw everything that was heavy from the plane, throwing the ball turret was something that was also done. This weighed about 380 kilograms, not counting the ammunition. Therefore, throwing it could represent the difference between returning home or not. In almost any emergency situation, it was extremely recommended to throw the turret to the ground. For forced landings, it was only allowed to throw the turret if it was going to land on land. In water landings or landing in the sea, throwing the turret could be a very serious mistake. Having a huge hole of 1.1 meters in the hull could accelerate the sinking of the plane, greatly reducing the time the crew members had to get out of the plane, leaving them faster at the mercy of the sea and making it so if they were unconscious, they could not quickly get out of the plane. In many situations of water landings, the turret was indeed thrown, especially in cases where the plane already had serious structural damage. It is certainly very interesting how the engineers of the time had thought of every tiny scenario that could present itself to the crews, giving them the tools so that they could do everything possible to return home. If you want to know more about bombers, I recommend you watch this video about why bombers stopped using tracers in the Second World War. Thank you very much for watching this video and see you in the next one. Goodbye.